actually going to introduce another special guest on the Retail Perch. And we've had a bunch of really amazing people on the Retail Perch over the last few weeks. And Steve is no less. He is a star in his own right. He has a fantastic speaker. I've heard him speak in many times, and he's also an amazing author. He's written a book called The Remarkable Retail. And basically talking about customer experience and how you need to handle the whole disruption in the industry. Of course, Steve has a huge background in retail. He's been an executive in several retail organizations. But I believe for the past 12 years, Steve, you've run your own consultancy. You've been kind of off on your own, and he's a speaker at many events that I've heard Steve speak. So it's fantastic to have Steve over at the Retail Perch. So with that, Steve, and Gary, unless you want to say something, we'll hand it over to Steve to give us a quick intro, and then take it away, Steve. Welcome.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for that very kind and generous introduction. Yeah, I often get asked, how did I end up doing what I'm doing? And I really have no idea. I started on a path working at a big consulting firm many years ago. I then migrated over to doing strategy work in the CPG industry. And then it's almost 30 years ago now, I guess, a headhunter called me to explore this job at Sears. And I wasn't necessarily that interested in retail, but at the time I had reasons to stay in Chicago. And the thing that really appealed to me was the opportunity to come in kind of a strategy and innovation role, but then move into actually running something, which was kind of my primary focus at that time. And it actually worked out, at least the first few years there, because I got a lot of different responsibilities, ended up running a big division, was responsible for starting some of the early channel integration efforts. So got involved with e-commerce pretty early on, but then it was pretty clear that Sears was not going to be turned around. And as I say in my book, I went from the outhouse to the penthouse, coming down here to Dallas, where I am now, to head up strategy and customer insight and some multi-channel stuff for the Neiman Marcus group. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, I decided to leave the corporate world. I actually took a little bit of time off and ended up kind of getting lured into consulting because people were approaching me about whether I was open to doing that. And it just kind of gone from there. With the biggest difference is probably in the last 4 or 5 years doing more speaking and workshops, and then ultimately writing Remarkable Retail.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know you're in your second edition of Remarkable Retail, right? And I'd love to talk about what you have in this book. So what prompted you to write this book, number one? Where did you see the need for this book, and what are you hoping to convey to the reader?
Sure. Well, there's the selfish part of it, which for me, I like to write, and I always felt like I was going to write a book about something at some point. So it's been a little bit of a bucket list item for probably 10 plus years. The question was, well, what is it going to be about? And I kind of backed into it through doing more speaking, because of course, when you do keynotes, you do workshops or whatever, you have to have a narrative, you have to have some stories to tell. And so as I started to develop that 4 or 5 years ago, the book narrative really started to coalesce. And then, ultimately I just had to sit down and write the damn thing. But in terms of what I'm trying to bring to the audience, I think it's really a couple things. One, well, first of all, the premise of the book, Remarkable Retail, is this idea that even very good is not good enough anymore, when customers have so much access, so much information, so much choice, that they're not likely to switch to your brand just because you're slightly better. So you've got to really kind of raise the bar on that. So that was the underlying premise. And then I really wanted to convey why that's important, what to do about it. And then I think the main thing on top of that was a lot of retailers, I don't believe, understood how much transformation was going to be required and how quickly they needed to do it. So hopefully I bring a sense of urgency to some of the messages in the book.
So of course, I happen to have the privilege of sitting among two well-published people, and Gary's of course written an amazing book as well. And I have your book on my list here to read, Steve, but I will definitely read it after this podcast, before this goes out on the air. But Gary, just to talk about, of course, what Steve's been writing, and it seems like a lot of the thoughts are kind of aligned in terms of you're coming at it from, hey, there's a new revolution happening in the industry and the customer expectations changing. And Steve's talking about, hey, if you don't change with your customer expectation, your business is going to get disrupted. And it's no longer good enough just to be slightly better. You just got to be able to completely revolutionize the customer experience. And I think, Gary, you talk about, how do you do that, right? How do you leverage what you have to do that? So I'd love to hear about what you think about, this entire concept of remarkable retail here.
Well, so I completely agree with Steve that I think the days of, let's call it the utility shopping experience, certainly going out to a physical store, are long gone, right? What I think we see happening certainly in grocery retail is, shopping online has become so prevalent. So many people have tried it now, have done it, have gotten comfortable with it, that for the routine replenishment, fulfillment of products, it's quite honestly easier simply to do it online and either pick it up on the way home or have it delivered right to your house. So I think if retailers are seeking to get that shopper to actually visit their physical store, they've got to provide something out of the ordinary, right? To quote Steve, remarkable. And, in my mind, I see things sort of coming into two areas, right? Either the retailer providing education. So, again, in the world of food, help me understand what this new cheese is, where it's from, what it tastes like, what do I pair it with, those types of things, and or experiences, right? Which could be food tasting, sampling, which is beginning to finally come back now from the pandemic. But, it's either one or both of those things combined. But Steve?
Yeah, I generally agree with that. One of the things I talk about in the book, which frankly I stole from some other people, is this idea, and it's certainly a little oversimplified or too black and white, but there's buying and there's shopping. And buying being more utilitarian, get something off your list, super convenience oriented. You're not spending a lot of time, you just want to get it done. And shopping being much more discovery, emotional, tactile, et cetera. And obviously there's a lot of in between, but e-commerce, transactional e-commerce, and I want to talk in a second about, we need a better definition for online shopping, but come back to that. But e-commerce transactionally is really good at the buying stuff, and where you see high penetration, whether we're talking about Amazon or Wayfair or any players are in those types of items, and you don't see as much transactional penetration on the more shopping sort of experiences. So I completely agree. It's when you've got so much access and convenience, and frankly, you've got some venture capitalists and companies subsidizing some of these products. I'm very happy to pay Amazon to deliver my big case of San Pellegrino water. It's a good price. It just shows up. They probably lose money on every single one they send to me, but it's super convenient for me. I'm still happy to go to the grocery store to pick out some salmon or, grind some coffee, or, there's plenty of other things that it's very hard to replicate online. So I agree. I don't know if you heard this, but Mickey Drexler, some listeners might know, ran Gap, ran J. Crew for many years. He talks about it as the de-schlepping of retail. Why would you schlep heavy bottled water, pet food, toilet paper, a whole bunch of things that are just a hassle, and you don't, you know what you want. You don't need to go see it. So unless you have some immediate gratification need, the internet's just going to win probably 99 times out of 100 going forward.
Yeah, no.
So how does a retailer achieve remarkable retail? Obviously, technology has become almost, a lot of these things have become commoditized, right? So everybody has the same thing. Right. What's the path to this remarkable retail for retailers? How do they find
Well, at the risk of being cliche, it starts with really understanding your customer well. And in a lot of cases, I think, though, not that this wasn't an idea before, but getting more and more focus on who your target customer is. Too many retailers, particularly if you think about department stores, they're just trying to be a little bit of everything to everybody, and they end up not being particularly important for any particular group. So going back and really understanding who's at that core of your customer base, what purchase occasions you're trying to reach. And I often suggest dissecting the customer journey, which could be many, many customer journeys when you think about the different sort of customers, particularly in the grocery industry. Obviously, you can often have a variety of types of customers. You got a wide range of products and services, but really going through that customer journey and really doing three things. One, doing a friction audit or a pain point audit, because in many cases, barriers are erected in the shopping process that just keeps you from giving any chance, not necessarily a chance to be remarkable, but it's a chance to take something that is a barrier to buying. The second is, what are those things you just have to be at parity with? They become table stakes. And then the third is to try to find 1, 2, 3, maybe more things, which I call amplify the wow. What's that thing that is unique, different, highly customer relevant, and ideally gives you competitive advantage. So the answer is going to be different for different sort of retailers, but I think that's the way you get there.
Yeah, I think, Gary, we of course spoke to Sandra a couple of weeks ago, or 2 episodes ago, and Sandra runs a consulting customer engagement reinvention consulting out of Toronto, I believe, and they have about 100 reinventionists working at the company. And she brought up, I think, 3 very interesting points. And I asked her, how do you figure out what to do for a customer to reinvent their experience? And she said, first, figure out exactly who your customer is, right? Don't try to do too many things for too many people. Second is figure out exactly what their needs are and make sure you're fulfilling them. And third is figure out how to differentiate yourself. And it's pretty much, I think, exactly what you said. I mean, it's obviously seems to be a mantra. So how does somebody take a concept like that and apply it to something like grocery retail, right? I mean, I can see if you're doing specialty retail, you have a unique product, you have an experience that goes with it. But, seems like, some of these concepts are not as easily translatable into supermarket retail, or maybe it is. I'm just, it's a question for both of you guys.
Well, I think supermarkets, if you think about the more sort of general merchandise kind of broad supermarkets, they absolutely have their own challenges because by their very nature, they're serving a much wider range. I mean, you could make the analogy somewhat to the department store world, except, even in the good old days of department stores, which was now 30 or 40 years ago, it was pretty unusual for even your best customers to come 6 or even 7 times a year. So obviously you've got different frequency, different kind of size of wallet in the grocery industry. So I think it is a little bit different, but I think you still have to go through the, what's the essential mix and what are those variables that drive me to choose you at the margin. I mean, there's going to be a core, I think, you're going to have to have milk, there's a lot of things that are just table stakes, but where can you really differentiate yourself? Now, I think historically, it's been prepared foods or deli, those sorts of things, but I think those have also largely become pretty commonplace now. So you have to go to the next level. I think in particular in the grocery business, and this is just a carryover from a lot of other retail, you also have to be realizing that it's not about online or physical, that the customer is the channel. And that pushes more work on you to really understand the customer journey. Because, even with all the discussion about how much e-commerce has been accelerated, a lot of that acceleration actually involves a physical store. It's digitally led or digitally enabled, but without the physical store, a lot of that growth wouldn't even occur. So my little rant on the definition of e-commerce is, if you think about the first 20 years or so of e-commerce, it was mostly order online, pick, pack, and ship something from a big distribution center and mail it to your home or office. Now you had, big ticket stuff that was locally delivered, And you had some buy online, pick up in store, and you had digitally downloaded music and everything. But if you look in particular, what's happened the last 5 years, much more is being ordered online, pick up in store, fulfilled out of a store through local home delivery, shipped from store. So we got to kind of get not too hung up on the online stats. You have to get hung up on focusing on the customer, all the different things they buy, whether that is digitally marketed, whether it's digitally ordered, and how is the supply chain work. And I think that's the bigger opportunity for grocers to understand beyond, just the merchandising part of it.
Yeah, and I think interested in your comments, Steve, around extending this idea of remarkable retail or providing an experience. How does that transfer over into the digital world, right? I mean, certainly, what we're seeing is the world of physical shopping converging with crashing into the world of digital shopping and this blending, fusing together of these experiences.
Right.
I think a lot of retailers, certainly in grocery retail, are still struggling with, quite honestly, basic user experience in the online grocery shopping area. But I think they're either going to fix that or those retailers aren't going to be around too much longer. But I think the future lies in how do you extend that experiential shopping into the digital world? You seeing anything interesting happening there?
Yeah, I think so. Well, first of all, it is more challenging for a grocery store to do e-commerce than most other players because of the number of items that are involved. And I think part of and because I totally agree with you, a lot of the user experience isn't great. But if I'm looking for a sweater and I go to Macy's, I can go through search, I can get it done, I can put in my cart. It's a pretty efficient process. If I'm doing my weekly shopping, most websites are a complete mess. So creating shopping lists and previously purchased and things like that, is a way of doing it. But I do think there are some just constraints that make the online enablement of grocery a bit more difficult. So I think you've got to deal with kind of the functional aspects of how the path to purchase if someone intends to buy online and have it shipped or buy online and go to the store. But I think the other element is when you think about customer needs, I was going back to what I said earlier about customer needs. I've got the book somewhere behind me, but there's a book called Obsessed. And it really is this idea of keep asking why when a customer describes a need to you. If I say, well, I need a bottle of wine. Well, why? Because I'm throwing a party, or because I'm trying to impress my mother-in-law, or is a different need state than I just want some cheap wine to drink while I'm watching Netflix, right? So I think that when you talk about needs, it's more what's that ultimate solution the customer is trying to accomplish. And too many websites, I think, are just about optimizing conversion and measuring success in that way. And that's not the only measure of success. It's tough to balance. Again, I think grocery is particularly tough to balance because of the variety. So to try to create a website and dynamic personalization and a lot of these other things that could make that better. I don't want to make it sound like I think that's trivial, but I think when you think about customer needs, you have to think about it. The need is not just find the product I think I want, put it in my basket and check out. It might be, I need a great recipe, or it might be, I need some products that are really going to impress my date, or, so asking those why questions, maybe sometimes even 5 or 6 times, helps you understand the need in perhaps a different way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that is challenging to do in grocery from the perspective of, it's you're eating food multiple times a day, right? If not grazing all day long. And so those need states are constantly changing. It's not like, hey, I'm going to a formal dinner party, I need a tuxedo, where can I go buy one? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
easy to understand need, experience, what do I need, right? With food, it's a whole different animal. Because it could be a dinner party, it could be, well, I just decided to go on this diet, so I need this now. It becomes much more complex.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's just the reality, right? I mean,
yeah, it's
a constraint or complication that you have to work around. So some of the things you can learn from other retailers' success don't necessarily transfer so well or as easily to the grocery industry.
Yeah, I think the second issue also in the supermarket industry that we've touched upon in this podcast many times is access to talent, right? To build these solutions. The guys who are graduating with degrees from good schools are not necessarily looking to go work at a supermarket retailer. They want to go work in some cool startup out of Silicon Valley, right? Yeah. So I think that's another interesting challenge that's facing this industry, which is how do you get access to people who can actually create these solutions and put them in place for you, right? And of course, we can sit here and discuss about what should be done, but actually getting it done is a whole nother thing. So when you talk to retailers, Steve, what have you seen retailers do in terms of implementing some of these ideas that we're discussing here? How are they going about it?
Well, it varies. I mean,
partner or buy versus buy type of decision.
I mean, really all the above. I certainly think I take your point. It is cooler to go work at some of these sexier sounding brands, or perhaps brands where you can get more of an equity stake. But I think the best retailers, they think about their journey to, remarkable, more harmonized retail in a series of building blocks, because plenty of retailers have gotten in trouble by trying to do too much too fast. So I think you sequence that out. You do a lot more of experimentation, and then you have to decide where you can partner with technology providers or consulting resources or independent contractors, whatever, versus bringing that talent in. I think the big shift I've seen, and I do think there is this war for talent that it does make it a lot harder to actually implement, is I do think most retailers have really changed their tune. I have one client who's imported a tremendous amount of talent from the outside, is also a heavy user of consultants, but they certainly have decided that, not that this is revolutionary, but it's like some of these capabilities, digital capabilities, supply chain capabilities, personalization, AI, whatever, that they have to have a fair amount of that talent within their organization. And then, they're selectively partnering with people to experiment, or if they've got a best-in-class provider doing that. So it's a blend. I mean, I don't think I can tell you. The only thing I could say consistently is I think there's more, the good ones, there's more experimentation, fast experimentation, and there's generally more of trying to get that talent into their team.
Yeah, but that is an ongoing challenge. And I think, increasingly, I think we're going to see fewer retailers across any sector or vertical being able to truly have the resources to bring the required talent into their organizations, because I think one of the things that's different today versus the past, and not too long ago past, is that today innovation is happening across every single place you look, as opposed to, even several years ago, it might be focused on supply chain for a while, and then it might shift to in-store, and then it might shift to digital, something else. Today, it's everything, everywhere, all the time. And so it just adds to the challenges.
It does. I heard, you remind me of, I heard Mindy Grossman, when she was running HSN, it's probably like a decade ago, speaking at the NRF conference, where she said, one of the things that's become so challenging in retail is you're only as good, or you're measured against the consumer's last great experience. When you had to run around, where there wasn't the internet, and you had to run around, well, I'm going to go to this store to talk to the salesperson to figure out what dishwasher, right? It was all, the information was very disaggregated. and innovation or ideas or whatever just couldn't spread so quickly, in general, but across platforms. So the experience that I have booking a hotel room, if that's wonderful, and then I go and get on a natural foods grocery store site and I can't do well, that was great. Now, why can't you even do that? I just think, again, that's another aspect of how expectations keep ratcheting up, and the customer doesn't care. Oh, you're an independent, or you're a grocery store, not a shoe store. It doesn't matter. I'm trying to get something done, and I'm pretty familiar with the best in class or things that I really like. So I agree. I think it's hard. I do like to think, I could be wrong for sure, that on the one hand, I totally agree that scale and scope is causing, will continue to cause consolidation of market share, generally speaking, to bigger players. And yes, while it's true, you can use BigCommerce or Shopify or whatever to get, or other vendors to help you kind of get competitive with the big guys. I do think it is harder for those in the middle. Again, it's a little bit of this idea I talk about in the book of the collapse in the middle. Some of that is a customer behavior, but some of it is also strategic, which is you're trying to be a little bit of everything to everybody, but you're not big enough or far enough along to compete with the big guys. You just end up getting marginalized. So the possible strategy is to try to be more special, to narrow your customer focus perhaps, and to go deeper and to use unique product or unique service or something different about the experience to cause advantage, not to keep kind of chasing your tail to try to out Amazon or out Walmart or out Kroger.
Yeah, I mean, I see it like a Trader Joe's, right, as a fantastic example, where you have raving fans of the store. People will drive many miles to get to the next Trader Joe's because they just love the experience. They like the product. I mean, it's all mostly private label, right? Exotic stuff. So they've clearly had a strategy that's worked, and to produce that remarkable retail. I mean, and I try to step out when I come out of a Trader Joe's and says, what is it about the store that I really like? And I think, to me, it's not too big, right? So I always feel that I have my bearings in the store, right? I'm not wondering you have to go to the other end of the store to pick up. It's decently small, but it has and they're focused on specific categories that they feel they can provide the best value in, instead of spreading themselves thin and carrying everything. They don't intend for you to be the one destination shop for your food.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I'm sure they do customer research that says, oh, I wish you had more baked goods, or I wish you had, more takeout prepared, or whatever. Like I'm sure there is this pull to add stuff. And I don't know what the right answer is. Perhaps they should be a little bit bigger. I don't know. But to your point, they have a very clear idea of who the customer is and the product categories they're trying to be impactful in. And they're willing, and I think that's a big part of strategy, particularly the way retail has evolved over the last decade or so, is who's this not for? Because to try to chase to be a little bit of everything is almost certainly going to end up put you in a bad place. And there's really few retailers, Walmart, Target, Amazon probably, that can try to be close to an everything store. But people, going to Walmart or going to Amazon, Target's maybe a little bit different animal. People understand. I mean, if you really think about Amazon, the user experience is not really that good. It's not. The website's kind of a mess, but it's designed for most of the kind of occasions that people want to go to. Similarly, Walmart, you can't meet all those needs without having a huge store. So to your point about Trader Joe's, is a really different experience, but the customer gets great selection, great price. And so they're trading off the intimacy or maybe getting some more premium products. But in between would be death, right? So you've got to really pick a lane, to use the cliche. And if you understand your customer well and you understand those different customer journeys, then that'll lead you to opportunities rather than just sort of try to be the biggest thing you can be out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to the point you brought up a few minutes ago around strategy. That is not a word I often use related to grocery retail, from the perspective that, I think one of the areas grocery differs from other retail sectors is the bottom line, right? Most supermarket retailers are still working on a 1% net profit, which is not a lot. That has historically forced a focus on execution, cost control, et cetera. The old saying, retail is detail, right? And my experience, supermarket operators, I don't care if it's one store or it's one of the national companies, very, very focused on execution, tactical operations, et cetera. And so I think it's only the bigger companies that have someone in the organization towards the top having the luxury of a little bit of time to think about strategy. And I think the complicating factor there today is that, and this is not in favor of the mid-market or the independent sector, is there is so much happening with technology and innovation, again, across every area, that retailers can't keep up with it. And, it's one thing to know about, for example, computer vision, right? Like Amazon Go. And retailers can quickly say, oh, yeah, okay, that's cool. I can get rid of my cashiers. I can reduce cost. Makes sense, right? They're not understanding the follow-on implications of that kind of platform, related to monitoring out of stocks, sharper traffic through the store. There's countless other applications that get laid on top of that tech platform that, my experience, 90+% of retailers haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah, that's probably true. To me, the challenge for the grocery industry broadly is what we've seen, I think, in a lot of other retail categories, modern department stores probably being the best example, which is you've got this massive investment in a lot of stores with a particular configuration. They're not easy, they're not agile, particularly. To your point about profit margins, you don't necessarily have it's one thing if you're Louis Vuitton or something to redo your store with 70% margins, right? It's not so easy to think about how to do that. But I think the danger, and I think we're starting to see it, it's just maybe hasn't shown up so much, is you've got all sorts of different players going after a slice of that broad business. So whether it is Trader Joe's or organic food, or it's Walmart, Target, Amazon, subscription, Hint water, tiny, but right. You got like a little bit of people saying, this, people talk about Jeff Bezos saying, your margin is my opportunity. My twist on that is your mediocrity is my opportunity. You've got people finding parts of this big business, trying to be a little bit to everybody with a lot of real estate and finding things to pick at. So it may be death by 1,000 cuts. I don't think like the grocery business is going to be overturned and like Blockbuster was, in a few years.
Yeah.
But, I think you have to ask yourself, and I say this to a lot of clients, if you had to do it all over again and you were starting with a blank sheet, what might you do? Not only with your, and you could have multiple formats perhaps, but, with your lead format, what would you do? And if you think about your deployment in a given trade area or metro area, what might you do different? So that might lead you to say, well, you know what? Maybe I need a somewhat smaller main store and I need pickup hubs or something. I don't know. Grocery's not the center of my bullseye, but I think when you see what's going on with Nike and you see what's going on with Nordstrom, where they're unbundling what they do in their everything kind of format and then rebundling it in ways, I think that's part of the way to get there. Now, you're never going to, redo your whole chain in a few years with that thinking. But if you don't start today, you'll be the frog boiling in water, just to use another cliche. And I think that's my worry for the big, kind of mass grocery chains. It's not like it's going to fall apart overnight. It's just going to fall apart slowly.
No, I think we're in a very exciting time because there is clearly because of the last 18 months, expectations have changed. Our habits have been forcibly changed in terms of how we access information and products. So there's an interesting, I was listening to something interesting yesterday talking about, office occupancies right now at 30%, right, across the country on average, which means 70% of office real estate is empty, is vacant, and they don't expect that to get back to maybe 60% at best, right? Which means that local businesses that were supported by that office traffic are going to be impacted. And so,
absolutely.
So there's going to be a consequence of this whole thing, and how we shop for our food, everything is going to change. And I think, to your point, retailers, and especially supermarket retailers, because food has become the center of our life now, again, need to really think about what does this new situation mean in terms of meeting customer expectation? Where do I need to meet my customer? How do I meet them best? And what are they really looking for from me, right? So I think it's fascinating. And, last 3-4, I think, episodes, Gary, we've spoken to a lot of people. We spoke to somebody from Microsoft, and I think we spoke to another Forbes contributor, Richard Kestenbaum, an episode ago. I'm sure you know him.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. And they were all talking about the same thing, about bringing awareness, about understanding where is your customer going and how do you adapt your business to meet that need where the customer is. Because it's no longer the business figuring out here's where you come to do the service, to get your products. It's now the customer dictating, here's how I want it. And I guess that's a big shift that's been happening here. So.
Yeah, and I think the more using something that Nordstrom has been employing for a while, I think you have to, as much as we talk about, online versus physical, I think it's more important, or at least it's worth adding, what are those customer segments that you need to grow and retain, and using that customer cohort lens, and then also looking at it on a trade area by trade area basis. Because if you're not, I would argue in general, I'm sure you can find some exceptions, but if you're not growing with those core customers that you need to win, grow, and keep, and you're losing relevance slowly on a market by market basis, then eventually that's going to catch up with you. But even more than that is, what are you losing? Are you losing, I'm making this up, but COVID, unfortunately, I think COVID's been unfortunate in a lot of ways, but from trying to understand a strategy point, we've seen such distortions driven by safety, not necessarily permanent behavior. So it's a little bit hard to say, oh, because this happened over the last 18 months, I've got to completely chase that. But, if consumers are preferring more neighborhood shopping, or they're preferring more premium products, or more organic, or socially, whatever, and you're losing that, you've got to do that on a more granular level. Because if you're a big retailer, like I can tell you, when I was at Sears, one of the things that we really missed, that we eventually started paying attention to, we just didn't do enough to figure it out, was that we were losing a lot of market share on a market by market basis to at the time, newer concepts like Home Depot and Lowe's and Best Buy. At the national level, you couldn't really see it. But when we started to dig in and say, well, these guys are going to expand, and if you just model that out, within a few years, it starts to be a huge problem. So that's going to be different for everybody. But I think, where you see perhaps the most innovative competitors, doing a deep dive into that market and see what's preventing you from acquiring customers at the rate you used to, or what's causing you to get lower share of wallet, or just fundamentally your overall mix of business goals. I think that can provide some interesting clues, which, you may be able to deal with within your merchandise assortment or service within your current format. But I might suggest that maybe, 30 big stores in the market isn't the long-term portfolio you're going to want.
Right. No, it's fascinating. I think this has been amazing conversation so far. And, and Steve, we always find ourselves in this position with our guests that we have these amazing conversations and we don't know where the time went. Right. And this has been our standing promise to all our guests that you have to give us your address so we can mail you a retail perch coffee mug. And the next time you come back on, the only way you get back on here, you got to be having coffee.
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
That's kind of like your ticket back into the show.
Okay.
But
seems like a reasonable trade.
Yeah, so it's been a fascinating conversation. I always enjoyed speaking to you and listening to you, and always hearing what you have to say, because I think, you know, and this is one of the things, right? When you have been on the retail side of things, and then you've been out of it, observing how it's growing and reacting, you have a different objective view of what needs to happen. And I love that, because I think that's really where disruption has come from. And you have to listen to people who are not necessarily doing it day in and day out, because you're too close to the tree to see the forest, type of thing,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I think what you and Gary and folks like you bring to the table really is this, step back. Let's look at the bigger picture, and this is the wrong way, kind of thing. You have the ability to do that, and I think a lot of our listeners really appreciate that. So thank you so much for taking your time and being on the show. Gary, anything?
Just to add on to what you just said, Shekar, I think the other thing that is becoming increasingly important, and that Steve spoke to today, is this idea that you can't live within just one retail sector or vertical anymore. You've got to be aware of what's happening across many different forms and areas of retail to inform what you're doing in your world. Because as Steve called out early on our conversation today, the shopper today is having experiences, good and bad, everywhere, and is bringing those thoughts, those perceptions, those expectations to how he or she interacts with you. I think that's a really important call out. So great conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Steve, so much for your time. And I'd love to get you back on in a few months from now. And I'm sure people out there, again, Steve's book is called Remarkable Retail, and it's fantastic. It's in the second edition. And I think that's not the full description of the book. It's actually Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, right? So get a copy of that. It's a fantastic book. And if you haven't heard Steve listen, he also does a podcast. And Steve, what is
the Remarkable Retail podcast? With my co-host Michael LeBlanc, who's an experienced retailer out of Canada. So we get a global perspective, North American and global perspective. So yeah, it'd be great to check that out.
Yeah, please check it out. And again, thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. We appreciate it. Keep the inquiries coming in. And again, if you want to get on the show as a guest, please do email us, and we'll be happy to schedule you in. Although I have to tell you that the line's getting long. Gary, that's getting pretty exciting.
I know. We've got a good pipeline going.
Yeah. And I want to thank, of course, Stephanie, who does an amazing job of editing this. And I don't know how she does it in a few days, but she does a fantastic job. So thanks, Stephanie. And you guys stay safe out there, and we'll meet you hopefully at places, now that we're starting to get around a little bit. But again, have a fantastic rest of the summer, and we'll talk to you soon. Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at The Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.
Until next time, this is Shekar.
And this is Gary, signing off.